Last season's struggles and an 8-year contract kicking in could change how the Nashville Predators balance their goaltenders' time in net. Today, we're going to tackle that tricky topic on part 2 of our Insiders Mailbag.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off our Hump Day episode, shouting out our Locked On Predators insiders and our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio. And my friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Emma Lingan, and I am an NHL reporter and host with the Hockey News.
Emma, we opened up the mailbag on Monday with our insiders community, and the letters came pouring out. Weren't bills. It was just good old-fashioned snail mail, friends. So we decided to extend our mailbag episode because there are still questions to be answered. On today's episode, we are going to talk about goaltending and how Juuse Saros and Justus Annunen may split time in net for the Nashville Predators. Plus, we're going to go there and talk about the John Hynes era in light of the recent struggles with the Nashville Predators. Do we evaluate his time in Nashville a little bit differently? So a lot of hot topics to dive into today, Emma. But before we get to all of those, we do want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Emma, we talked on Monday about defensemen. We talked about, can the Nashville Predators be a contender? We're going to kick off this episode in net. We have an in net question from one of our insiders. What do you expect game splits to look like next season between the goaltenders? Interesting question. Maybe wouldn't spend as much time wrestling with this if it wasn't for the context of where everything is. Of course, Juuse Saros coming off of his worst statistical season, played 58 games last season, 2.98 goals against average, and 896 save percentage for the season. Also, just of note, on July 1st, his 8-year deal kicked in with the Nashville Predators. Of course, the Predators did, I don't know if you all remember, go back in your mind to when Scott Wedgwood was a part of the Predators team for like 4.5 minutes. I know, it's so hard to even remember. Like, will he get a tribute video, Emma? That's, I think, the question we want to wrestle with. Like, can you make a 4-second tribute video and not have it be awkward? I don't think so. But Justus Annunen, of course, joined the team in that trade. He played 23 games in Nashville. He did play 11 in Colorado before his trade. He finished the season in Nashville with a 3.17 goals against average and 888 save percentage for the Predators. Here is what we know for sure, Emma. Nashville has to have a better start all the way around, offense, defense, in net. And some of that pressure to get off to a good start could fall on the goaltender early because there is some work and looks that need to happen defensively. We got to get some chemistry going with the forward group. It feels like the one area where you really want to be good right out of the gate is you want Juuse Saros to be good to steal some games. So how do you see his season going, and how do you see the Predators utilizing Saros and Annunen in this particular circumstance?
I honestly think it's going to be dependent in large part on how the season is going. I do think that early on it's going to be primarily Saros, and we talked about this before, like even before last year happened, that Saros was getting overused, and
Yes.
that there's no reason for him to be getting overused when your backup was Kevin Lankinen, and then than Justus Annunen and even Scott Wedgwood too. So there wasn't really a a reason for that to be happening. We did start to see Annunen get some more starts down the stretch last season, obviously, when it was very clear that the Predators weren't going anywhere, weren't doing anything. So that was good. But I don't think, people are asking for, I think some people are asking for more of a 1A, 1B situation in net, because a lot of teams around the league have that. And people are saying, oh, it's a tandem league. Yes, it is. But not every team has a UC Saros. And it's
Yes.
the same. Like, again, a lot of people don't want to hear that. And because, yes, no one is sitting here saying he didn't just come off of his worst year statistically. But again, I say, if you are saying that UC Saros was responsible, or at least primarily responsible, for the calamity that unfolded this past season, you didn't watch. You weren't watching the
Yes.
games. And so I'm not saying that makes it all better and that the results, it's fine that he had a bad year. No, it's not. But I'm just saying that I think, like we've talked about with a lot of other things, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's going to depend on, like you said, how the defense, kind of pans out in front of him, how the forwards, can they get back to goal scoring, where you're not relying on defense to win games for you and bail you out, at every turn. And I just think that people who are asking for a more 1A, 1B situation with Saros and Annunen don't fully understand what they're asking for. And I don't mean any disrespect to Justus Annunen, but
Right.
he was in that situation in Colorado. He was in a 1A, 1B because their other goaltender was Alexander Georgiev, and you needed someone to be a 1B with him, or 1A. Actually,
Yeah.
Annunen kind of turned into the 1A. So I think that, he was in that situation probably before he was ready to be. So just because we know he can doesn't mean that that's the ideal situation for him. And I think that you get him developed, you get him more comfortable to where, down the line, maybe it does become more of an ideal situation. But again, people are just so quick to give up on UC Saros, and I
Yes.
don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's very upsetting. As, again, a self-proclaimed UC Saros apologist, I understand that a lot of people don't share my beliefs about him, but I think that it was baffling to me how many people looked at what happened last year and said, oh, you know what the problem is? It's UC Saros.
Goaltending. Yeah. This is the perfect case of statistics tell you the truth except when they're lying. Because yes, statistically it was his worst season. But if all you're going to do is look at numbers on a page and then say the biggest problem was UC Saros, again, you didn't watch the games and you don't put those numbers in any sort of context. The defense absolutely collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane around him towards the end of the season. There is really no way that you lay all of last season primarily at the goaltending feat. Now, you do need better from Saros. But I agree with you. And I think this is so important. We talk about how Nashville has to have a hot start. That was UC Saros last season. And people forget that. People forget that. He had a 913 save percentage average in his first 15 games last season. He was doing the things. And if you can
And
get UC Saros to have that start again with some help from the other problems that we had last season, it's going to look different. So, yeah, I agree with you. People have to chill out about the UC Saros thing.
and this is a guy who typically does not get off to strong starts. Like, he's kind of known for this, for getting off to a slow start and then he eventually catches up. But this past season, again, everyone's so quick to forget, he actually got off to a very strong start.
Mhm.
And that's after he missed the opener. Remember
Yep.
when Scott
Yeah.
Wedgwood had to start the opener because he had a injury scare, I think.
Mhm.
And then unfortunately, that was not Scott Wedgwood's best work in that game. And the problem is, that's his Predators fans see him for the first time and it didn't go well and he couldn't stop a beach ball. And so now they're like, oh my God, we need Juuse Saros to be amazing. And you know what? For the first, 15 games, he was.
You got
He
it.
was.
You
But no
got
one
him.
else was. And
Yeah.
so it's like, well, he doesn't get the credit for when he did the things well. But as soon as things started to go south, everyone started to place the blame on him.
Yeah.
And again, no one is arguing that he had a great year. He didn't. But there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to that discussion. When it comes to splitting starts, I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be a 1A, 1B situation. You do not want Saros hellebucking his way through the season again. You would like to see fewer games. I think Saros is going to be in like the 60s, low 60s ballpark, right around 60 games, and maybe Annunen a few more because I think they do like what they've seen from Justus Annunen. But if fans are expecting there to be this 50-50 split in net, that is simply not going to happen, nor should it. Nor should it, because, and I agree with you. I think people are very quick to kind of dismiss Saros as not being good enough. Oh, he hasn't won playoffs. He hasn't won. Friends, the Nashville Predators have not been a good playoff team. So that's just what's real. Again, you can pull numbers, but put them in context. But I do think that he is going to be one of your best players, and he is going to be the player that you're going to want in net. You are especially going to want him to have a strong start. And hopefully that's what we're gonna see from Saros at the beginning of the year. But I do think you're looking at Saros still carrying, more of the games. This is not going to be a 50-50 split in net. And it shouldn't be. And it shouldn't be. Coming up, very interesting question. We're going to go off in the emotional jingweeds with, did the Nashville Predators give up on John Hynes too early? Did they do that former coach a little dirty? We're going to wrestle with that coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Friends, we have all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you have been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. Friends, that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal? Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. And if you wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy, the app is going to show you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Emma, we're just going to go there because, sometimes you just got to go there. After the seasons that the Nashville Predators have had with Andrew Brunette, we're still trying to land on what exactly they have behind the bench. But here is a question from an insider that I think is worth wrestling with. How do we evaluate John Hynes' stint in Nashville now? Now that the Predators have regressed and seeing his relative success in Minnesota. In hindsight, does it feel like Nashville did him dirty as an organization and as a fan base? Well, friends, pull up a chair, get yourself a snack, and let's talk about something that is, this is going to be really controversial for a lot of people. I think John Hynes, I think there is so much to look at in the John Hynes era for me, Emma. First of all, I think much maligned from the moment he was hired. I don't think anybody initially loved the hire. So I think he came in to a fan base that was like, oh, that's who we got. And while Nashville didn't excel necessarily and take that next step under John Hynes that I think everybody wanted them to, are we learning that maybe that had to do with the roster and not the head coach? There's a whole podcast right there. And you never can evaluate a coach. We keep saying the term in a vacuum, but in a vacuum, because you have to look at what John Hynes has done since joining Minnesota. You have to look at where the Nashville Predators are. And it really does make you go, Emma, did Nashville do John Hynes dirty?
Well, that is a question. That's a layered question.
It is.
I will say, regardless of whether firing him and hiring Andrew Brunette, we'll get to that in a second, as far as whether that was the right decision. But absolutely, unequivocally, 1000%, they did John Hynes dirty in the way that they fired him.
Let's go.
They left him twisting
Hanging
at the end of the season. He was up there twisting. And I think that, at that point, it's like, to me, it's like if you're dating someone and you know that you're like not invested in the relationship, but you're just keeping them around in case no one better comes along. And then someone better comes along. So they're like, oh yeah, never mind. I don't want you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what Barry Trotz did to John Hynes. And so I think that whether firing him was the right decision or not, you have to acknowledge that the way that they did it was not fair, because they left him hanging for so long after the season was over, made him, do the season ending press conference with the media.
So tough.
And then, at that point, by the time they finally let him go and hired Andrew Brunette, at that point, every team that needed a coach had hired a coach at that point. So you do him dirty. Now, yes, you still owe him whatever's remaining on his contract. So it's not like he's not getting paid, but still, it's like he could have gotten another coaching opportunity and you cost him that. Now, of course, hindsight 2020, he ended up getting that opportunity midway through the year with Minnesota, and so it worked out. But I just think that the way that went down was so unfair to him, because Barry Trotz had already moved on from him in his mind. But he then, he left him hanging. He left him around because at the time he wasn't sure if he could get Andrew Brunette, because New Jersey was still in the playoffs at that time. And Andrew Brunette was evidently a hot commodity around the league. And so Barry Trotz was trying to keep his bases covered. It's like, well, I have someone under contract, so I guess I'll keep him until the guy I really want becomes available.
Yes.
So didn't love that. So did they do him dirty in that regard? Absolutely, yes. I do understand the logic or the thought process as far as wanting to go with Andrew Brunette over John Hynes if you're Nashville, because John Hynes coaches a very a defense first brand of hockey, which worked very well in Nashville with the roster that they had. But Barry Trotz, to his credit, one of the first things he said as soon as he came in, we want to get more goal scoring. We want to be more offensive. We want to be more aggressive in that way. And so I do understand if that's your goal and you're looking at John Hynes side by side with Andrew Brunette, it makes sense why you would want to go with the Andrew Brunette type of system over John Hynes. Like if you're trying to add more goal scoring, Barry Trotz would say, we want to get people out of their seats. I get it from that standpoint. I do get it. And then you go and you add these new pieces after, Andrew Brunette has one good year, or at least half of a good year with Nashville, and then it just kind of falls apart. And I don't really know. Again, it's only been 2 years, and they were two very different years for Andrew Brunette. So now I don't know that you can fully do like a full postmortem yet at this point and say this was or wasn't the right decision. Because John Hynes again ends up in Minnesota. Minnesota has Kirill Kaprizov, who, I'm sorry, is going to be the great equalizer no matter who you're talking about. Like,
Right.
Nashville doesn't have a Kirill Kaprizov. So, like, yes, Minnesota was very successful. They had pieces. They were able to get to the playoffs. Didn't last very long. They had a lot of injuries that they were dealing with last year,
Yeah,
including
they did.
Kaprizov. So I think that, that's something to factor in. But I agree with you, going back to what you started with, saying that Hynes was not a popular hire to begin with, because the Predators David Poile fired Peter Laviolette mid-season and immediately hired John Hynes. And so I think a lot of people were like, seriously, we fired Laviolette mid-season to get this guy? Because everybody remembers Peter Laviolette as the guy who got the team to the Stanley Cup final.
Right.
But that was what, 3 years earlier, 2 years earlier, something like that. And so it's like things weren't going well at that time. And so I think I don't know what people were expecting. Again, with a mid-season hire, who do you think you're going to get? Like,
right. They're not just sitting, the top guys are not just sitting around in a recliner. They're sitting around behind a bench.
Yeah. And so it's like, do people just think that, oh, like, well, we fired Peter Laviolette mid-season, it must be because we're going to hire John Cooper from Tampa? Like, no,
Yes.
of course not.
That's not
And
how it
so,
works.
like, again, I will say, I personally have loved every minute of working with John Hynes. I think he's a fantastic human being. I do think he's a great coach. I understand and I acknowledge where Barry Trotz was going here with the sort of the direction he wanted to take the team in, and that is valid. But I will just say, I don't know. That's my extremely long-winded way of saying that I don't think it's been enough time yet for us to discern whether it was or wasn't the right move. But I can say with certainty that the way in which it happened, absolutely
So bad.
not fair. Not fair.
I agree with everything you're saying. Just want to emphasize two of your points. The way it went down was awful. I mean, sitting in that media at the post, kind of the end of the season media, in that early off-season media opportunities that we had, it was like John Hynes was in a job interview in front of the media for a job he already had. And it was just bizarre. It was bizarre. The other thing I will say is I think it would have gone a long way for the fan base, and this is semantics, but words matter, if David Poile had named him interim head coach mid-season when he fired Laviolette. And even if he had intended to go straight on and hire him, I think people felt like it was a knee-jerk hire and they weren't going to give him a chance. And I know that seems crazy and it's just a word, but I think the fan base would have liked the word interim head coach when John Hynes came in. And I think they would have given him more of a chance, probably. I agree with you. It's hard to know right move, right fit, wrong fit right now, because we don't know much of anything in Nashville at this point. Also want to echo John Hynes, top tier from a media perspective, top tier guy. So
And
yeah, I just miss him. I really loved media with him. He was great.
He was great with the media, very thoughtful with his answers, but also I will say, having had the privilege of getting to know him sort of behind the scenes when I was working for the team and spending a lot of time around him, even just, not in a media perspective, just as a person, just great guy,
Talk to
really thoughtful, just really good person. And I will say that's not just us saying that. When I was traveling with the team and we went back whenever we went to New Jersey, they rolled out the welcome mat for him there. They loved him in New Jersey. Now, the fans, maybe not, I don't know, but it's more of like if you're behind the scenes, you're down at ice level and you're looking at how he's interacting with people and how, people on the coaching staff, the training staff, the players, the game day staff, all of that, they love him there.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like whatever a fan base has decided about a coach or even a player is not always what's correct about that person. And
Yeah.
so like he is incredibly well respected and well liked in every place that he's coached. So
Yeah. And I also think you have some people who maligned him for a shtick. But again, that's a
oh yeah.
podcast for another day. So we're going to put a pin in that one and maybe we won't revisit it and we're just going to let that simmer there. Coming up, we're going to wrestle with a question. What is in Ryan O'Reilly's future? Is he going to be a Nashville Predator next season? Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever just wish managing money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you are growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and all of your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are also building wealth. Monarch Money is a fabulous tool for young adults setting out on their own and setting their financial goals. It also makes financial collaboration even easier. You and your partner can stay on the same page about spending, investing, and saving all in one place without any extra stress. So take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, Emma, this is a question I think that's on everybody's mind. And one of our insiders put it into words. Do you think if this season goes off the rails again, heaven help Emma and I, we're going to look like we are 279 years old, 7 years ago. If it goes off the rails, do you see Barry Trotz finally trading Ryan O'Reilly? Look, Ryan O'Reilly, hot commodity. Teams that are competing want Ryan O'Reilly. If there is a team that is in contention and the trade deadline comes up, who is the name everybody's talking about? Well, not Colton Sissons anymore. It's Ryan O'Reilly. What are the odds, Emma, that he sticks around? Because Barry Trotz he's taken a unique approach to Ryan O'Reilly staying with the Nashville Predators. Do you think that could come to an end?
Yes, I do think that he gets traded at the deadline if things are not in a better place. Now, I do think, for better or for worse, if the Predators are within shouting distance of a wild card spot, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But and that I think is a little bit of Barry Trotz's former boss, Lou Lamoriello in New York. That is where that comes from, because Lou is very much like that. Very committed to keeping the guys that he likes. Even if, realistically, if you want to look at this team and be like, you know what, we're probably not making any noise in the playoffs this year, didn't matter. If they were within a whisper's distance, it would be, they would hang on to him.
Yeah.
So with that caveat, there's that. I also think, though, that if they are, like you said, heaven help us, if they're in the same sort of situation at the deadline this year that they were last year, I think he gets traded. However, as long as the team he is traded to is not the Toronto Maple Leafs, because I have it on very good authority. Ryan O'Reilly would probably rather set himself on fire than play for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
And I think even though he did play for the Toronto Maple Leafs briefly before he came to Nashville, and that is how he arrived at that conclusion. Now we know that Ryan O'Reilly is want to, all but set himself on fire after
Oh
losing a
gosh,
game.
one bad game. Yeah.
So, but I think, so that how much this means when I say I think he would rather lose every game for the rest of his life than play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So,
Yeah.
again, I think Barry Trotz is probably still going to ask, he's going to ask for a lot in return. He's going to want a team to overpay for him. But at that point, he's on an expiring contract. I think if you can flip him for a Gus Nyquist kind of thing this last year, like a second round pick at the deadline,
Yeah.
I don't see that as a loss for you when he's on an expiring contract.
Yeah. I do think teams would overpay for Ryan O'Reilly. He is one of those players that if you're a team thinking, you know what, this may be our year, and you're like, you know what we need some depth experience, Ryan O'Reilly is your guy. But Barry Trotz has been very interesting about Ryan O'Reilly. Like, I'm going to treat him like he has trade protection, and I wouldn't move him without him being okay with it. And I do think if Nashville is completely out of the conversation, I mean, run it back from last year, Barry Trotz, it's going to be very hard to explain not making a move and getting something for Ryan O'Reilly at the trade deadline. Like, that's loyalty beyond common sense. And that's from people who really like Ryan O'Reilly, but that's just what's real. I mean, that's just not good business to do that. I agree with you, though. I think if the Nashville Predators could spit and with the right wind hit a second wild card spot, Barry Trotz, you're going to have to pry Ryan O'Reilly out of Barry Trotz's cold, dead hands. So I don't know. And again, it comes back to, it's very hard to know for sure what we're going to get from the Nashville Predators this season, whether that is even going to be a reality at the trade deadline or not. But I think Barry Trotz has to make that move if the Predators are 100% out of contention. Time for one more really quick question. This is a little bit of a personal question, but not too personal because we don't answer those questions, friends. One of our insiders wanted to know, what is your favorite interview or article or piece you have done on the Nashville Predators? I know.
Gosh. That's hard. That's really hard. I think I'll go with, for me, this was back when I worked for the team. So I'm dating back a couple years now, but I did an in-depth feature on the goalie coaching staff. So at the time,
Yes,
it was
I
right after
remember.
they hired Pekka to the staff there. So I talked with Ben Vanderklok, Jason Barron. I almost said Justin Barron. Jason Barron, who
Different
is
article.
the goalie coach for Milwaukee. Imagine if Justin Barron was the goalie coach for Milwaukee. That would be interesting. But no, it was Ben Vanderklok, Jason Barron, and Pekka. And got them all together at training camp couple years ago, and we chatted for probably close to 40 minutes. And it was really cool because I got to get all three of them together. It was one of those where, like, I could have still written the story even if I got each of them separately, and did individual interviews with them. But I think that getting them all in a room together and seeing how they kind of played off of one another, because obviously, Pekka and Benny have that history,
Yeah.
needless to say. And then Jay he was one of Benny's like students, like goalie students from childhood. Like, he's known this kid almost his entire life. And so it's like seeing them, they all have like a language they speak like that, just it just worked. And like the connection, this sort of like unspoken bond that these guys had, and the way that it was like they all shared the same brain. And just getting some more insight into how they operate, how they work and talk with different kinds of goalies who have different styles and everything. And it was just really cool, so very insightful, and that was probably my favorite.
Amazing. Nashville, I gotta tell you, like, look, you if you're a regular, there's a lot of things Nashville's not doing great right now, but you gotta love like the goaltending development system. In Nashville, very, very fortunate to have the staff that they do with this franchise right now. For me, mine goes back to my hockey news days. The hockey news was doing a enforcers issue, and I got a chance to talk to Mark Borvietsky, who one of my favorites. Mark Borvietsky, fascinating person, but I had such an interesting conversation with him about being an enforcer and what his, early hockey career was like, and how you fall into these specific roles defensively, and not getting pigeonholed, but also knowing what you bring and developing. It was just fascinating. I think he is such a fascinating person to talk to anyway, but that was probably one of my all-time favorites, is getting to talk to him about, just kind of that enforcer role and defense in general. And we've had a chance on Penalty Box Radio to talk with him about player development, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about too. So he's just fascinating, you all. I think he's one of the most fascinating hockey people I have ever talked to. I love Mark Borvietsky.
Very thoughtful, very well read, extremely
so smart.
well read.
So smart.
Also just had a birthday, just celebrated a birthday recently. So happy birthday, Boro.
Happy belated birthday. That's just, amazing. Happy birthday to Boro. If I would have known, we could have like baked him a cake, but next year.
Yep.
Maybe next year. Yeah. So a lot of questions about the Nashville Predators. We've answered some of them. It's going to take training camp and some lineup work and some coaching work to see where the rest of the answers are going to fall this season for the Predators. But we are going to be following all of that, of course, this offseason as we gear up for what is about to happen in October. On Friday's show, special guest JD Young is coming on, and we're talking about the topic that everybody in Nashville wants to know the truth about, and that is a rebuild. We have a very frank conversation with JD Young about what a rebuild looks like, why it is successful, what happens if it's not successful. And it's all based on a really interesting article at the Daily Faceoff about rebuilds as well. So make sure you tune in on Friday for our conversation with JD Young on rebuild or retool on the fly. It's a whole thing. We're going to see what this season does and see where we land on that. Emma, before we log off on this Wednesday, will you let everyone know where they can find you and your work?
Yes, you can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
You can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back Friday to talk rebuild. We'll see you then.